So this video needs to start with a bit of a disclaimer. For a start, I think that Valheim is a game with tons of potential. The game is a ton of fun in a lot of instances, but I also think that it's deeply flawed in a number of ways. And to fully realise the potential this game holds, some of those things would need to be addressed, in my opinion. Secondly, Valheim is an unfinished game. Not as an insult, it's literally in early access. The developers are still working to finish the game. So you might be wondering, if the game's unfinished, why am I making a video talking about how I think there's a ton of things wrong with it? Well, because although this game is in an early access state, the reviews for this game were so overwhelmingly positive that it set my hopes so high that I didn't really realise what I was getting myself into. My enormously high hopes ended up being mired by a ton of things that, to me, seemed like glaring gameplay issues that just got brushed over or completely ignored in a lot of these positive reviews. I played this game with a friend, and our expectations were slowly proven to be much too high as the game started grinding to a halt in ways that we weren't ready for. Don't get me wrong, the game is good for what it is, and it deserves a lot of the praise that it receives, but it gets bogged down by a lot of things that I personally hate a lot. These positive reviews, although deserved, were definitely not objective over what the game actually is, which is of course to be expected from Steam reviews, because the only people who care enough to leave reviews are the people who unconditionally loved the game, or had a burning hatred for the game. The more average middle ground objective reviews with pros and cons just don't exist. So, now this video is going to make a lot of people upset, isn't it? Well, if you do get upset, just make sure to watch the entire video start to finish before leaving a really angry comment. Anyway, let's start to investigate Valheim. For anybody who doesn't somehow already know, Valheim is an adventure sandbox game. You build a house, you craft gear, you fight bosses, you know the deal. If the hive mind of the internet is anything to go by, it's a complete unbridled masterpiece. But, despite that opinion being considered the norm, I want to dive headfirst into my first criticism of this game. This point is going to be pretty omnipresent throughout the video, but I'll put it right at the beginning anyway. The game's pacing varies wildly. And the reason it varies is because the game's length is artificially extended by garbage. In the first few hours of the game, things are progressing very fast. You spend a lot of time on your starting island finding new materials to make better gear with. But once you've grown out of the Black Forest, you have to start trekking across vast regions of empty nothingness just to get to the next boss. Rinse and repeat for every other subsequent boss for the rest of the game. Some items require arbitrarily more resources to craft than other similar items, just as a means to artificially lengthen the game's runtime. A silver sword is 40 silver, but an iron sword is just 20 iron. Why? Well, to force you to grind extra hard for this one item, of course. Silver is actually less abundant than iron, but despite that, you still need more silver to get your sword. Silver is found high up in the mountain biomes buried underground, but you're still made to take even more trips to many more mountains just to stand still and mine a rock for a prolonged period of time to get enough silver to make all the items that you wanted. The only reason you need more silver than you needed iron is to artificially lengthen the game's runtime. The other way that the game's runtime gets artificially lengthened is travelling, which brings me very, very nicely onto my next complaint. The world is too fucking big. In my playthrough with my friend, we discovered every single biome within this relatively small region of the world. All of the loot from these biomes could have been acquired without travelling outside of this region. But we wanted to go fight the next boss, the Bone Mass. Where's the Bone Mass, you might ask? Well, he's over there. Double the distance we've already travelled in our adventures around this region right here. So you might be wondering, well maybe he's out that far because he's in some sort of special biome, or maybe he's in a little special castle that you have to fight him in. Nope. He's just in a swamp. There's swamp biomes all over the place, much closer than this one. The only reason that I could come up with that they would put the boss this far away is because there's no reason to travel that distance otherwise without arbitrarily forcing the player to do so. If it wasn't for boss locations, we would have literally no reason to go beyond this circle of the map that we've already visited. Now this is something that I hope the developers fix, because like I said, this game is in early access. If they added a bunch of reasons to travel to the far north and far south of the map, then maybe it would be worth having the map be this big. There is an unfinished biome in the game called the Mistlands. Maybe when the Mistlands is finished, it could be the reason that you venture out that far into the world. But as it stands right now, the map is more than double the size that it realistically needs to be, all to force you to travel vast distances to elongate the game's runtime. So how do you travel these massive long distances in this game? Well, you sail on your sailboat. Woo! Oh yeah! Well, to give credit where it's due, the sailing mechanics in this game are really cool. It works just as you'd expect a real-world sailboat to work. You have to sail along with the wind. If the wind is directly facing towards you, you have to adjust accordingly so that you can keep going to your destination. I really enjoy this. I think it's a great way to make the game immersive and make you actually feel like a cool-ass Viking guy sailing to unknown lands. But due to the sheer size and scale of the world, the awesome sailing mechanics just end up feeling like more of a chore than a fun game mechanic to play with. The moment the novelty of being in a cool Viking boat wears off, you're just sat, waiting. Here's a sped up clip of me using the best boat in the game to sail from my spawn point to the bone mass boss spawner. This trip took me more than 23 minutes to complete. Bear in mind that most of this is just me doing literally nothing. Once I've got the ship pointing in the right direction with the wind at a good angle, I just let go of my keyboard and I sit there, waiting to arrive at my destination. It's a very long time to be sat doing absolutely nothing in a video game. But hey, the devs thought of this. They allowed you to build portals. That way, you only need to travel this sort of distance once. After that, you just plonk down a teleporter, and voila, you can teleport from your house to your portals and back again to skip all of that tedious travel time. Except, not really. There's just one problem with this. You can't teleport with ores and metals. For no fucking reason. So if the reason you're going to these distant biomes is for the express purpose of getting loot from said biomes, you have to sail back anyway. You have to make multiple trips back and forth to and from your boat with ore. This game has an inventory weight system, so you can't carry too much, by the way. You spend a ton of time ferrying silver or iron or whatever back and forth from your boat, and then you spend over 20 minutes sitting in said boat, doing literally nothing so that you can get home and make a silver hat. This is essentially my next point to critique about this game. The grind. Now there's nothing wrong with grinding for gear in a game, but Valheim has taken the grindiness so far beyond a reasonable level that it becomes less of a game and more of a chore. You spend an obscene amount of time travelling to a place, mining for something, and then travelling back again. Let's compare this to another game that has quite a lot of grind, but, in my opinion, handles it perfectly. Terraria. Terraria also features a lot of grinding for gear, so why is it that Terraria's grinding is great, but Valheim's is fucking terrible? Well, there's a few reasons. For one, Terraria heavily minimises the downtime. The time where you aren't really doing much at all. The travelling doesn't take as long in Terraria. Walking to the place where the loot is doesn't take 19 years. Whilst you're gathering the loot, you will also have to fend off enemies coming from all angles and move from place to place getting more of the loot. And once you're done gathering your stuff, you can do this. Instantly back home with your shiny loot, ready to turn it into whatever you wanted to make. Terraria's grind also comes in multiple forms. Sometimes you kill a boss, sometimes there's an event that drops special loot that you can't get anywhere else, sometimes you go mining, sometimes you generate gold to buy it from an NPC. In Valheim, you go mining, and some enemies drop some useful things too, but that's it. The bosses drop useful items, but they aren't part of the grind. Once you've killed the boss, it has dropped its one useful item already, and you never have to kill it ever again. Terraria links all of its exciting aspects into the grind. The combat, the bosses, the exploration, whatever. Valheim doesn't do such a good job of this. You just stand in a location mining, and that's it. In certain areas, like the sunken crypts, enemies very rarely even come and bother you at all, so you're literally just sat there, left-clicking a big pile of garbage until it gives you enough iron to come back over-encumbered to your boat. I know that I said the work is the fun, but they're pushing it to its limits a little bit here, I think. And you know the most annoying part? The only change that they would need to make is just let you go through the portals with metal and ore. That's literally it. It would make the grind so much more bearable than it currently is, with one simple change. Travelling out there just the once is so much more bearable than constantly making round trips to every single biome every time you want an item that is arbitrarily not able to be teleported. And again, it all comes back to what we talked about in the beginning. The only reason that I could find that the game works this way is to artificially extend the game's playtime. This game also suffers from a problem that a lot of games like this can also suffer from, which is that it's very, very easy to get lost. Me and my friend got a little bit unfortunate, where we didn't really go deep enough into this one sunken crypt that had the boss locator in it. So we didn't discover this, and we had no idea where the boss was, so we had no idea what to do next. This isn't really the fault of the game, we just got a little bit unlucky. What is the fault of the game, however, is that the boss locators for the final two bosses are just randomly strewn about the biomes that the boss is meant to be fought in no particular place, in no particular dungeon. Just go find it. We spent a cripplingly boring amount of time looking for the little locator rune for Moda and Yagluth, just because the first 3 or 4 mountains and plains we visited didn't have one. It'd be so incredibly easy to make their spawn rates higher, but slowing down progression to add to the game's duration is much easier, apparently. But let's talk about something that we haven't really touched upon yet. If you do get into a fight with some enemies, and you're unfortunate enough to die, what happens? Well, your items drop on the ground in this little red tombstone. You also lose skill points, which just generally makes you weaker. You have to run up to your items and grab them all, and then run away to safety to re-equip your stuff again. You do not regain the skill points that you lost when you do this. The skill points you lost are gone forever until you retrain that skill. This, in theory, sounds just fine, but in practice, it can be a little bit too punishing for my liking. For example, we sailed to the plains. We'd never been there before and we didn't know what enemies existed there. There is an enemy type called a death Htwo. Worst name for an enemy I've ever heard, by the way. I managed to build a portal without dying to narrowly avoid the catastrophe that would have been leaving my items over here when we spawn over here. We went exploring in the plains and we aggroed a lox and a bunch of little goblin bastards. Fine, right? We can just get our stuff and then flee back to our portal, right? Well, there's just one problem. Enemies can destroy your portal. The Lox, for seemingly no reason, decided that instead of chasing me, it really liked the look of this big wooden circle, and it destroyed it in front of my very eyes. Before I could repair it, I died and left mine and my friend's items stranded all the way over there, with our boat. We had left some gear at home. We tried to prepare for this, but it was too low level gear to reasonably sail out there and survive, and we didn't have enough to build another boat. So we had two options: run around, gathering the resources to build another boat, build another portal when we arrive at our destination, and be able to fight off the enemies for long enough to recover our items, which could easily take an hour and a half in total, if not more. Or we could cheat. Use console commands to fly over there and build a portal anyway. We didn't cheat, we grinded, we made a boat, we made another portal, and everything was fine and dandy. But then similar things happened to us, literally 3 more times in a row on 3 different islands. We had our portal get aggroed and destroyed, we had our boat get aggroed and destroyed. This soured our experience of the game so much that we barely even wanted to play anymore. So to save us our sanity, we cheated to get our items back, so that we could maintain the willpower to continue playing the game. The punishment for death being somewhat harsh makes sense, because if there's no real punishment for death, then dying wouldn't be a real issue. You could just suicide mission every biome until you fully beat the game. This is actually something that I have a criticism of in Terraria. You don't lose your items on death, so you can just run in and keep dying as long as you eventually get the stuff you need. Valheim is at least trying to not let you cheese the game. But the punishment being this harsh not only stops you from cheesing the game, but it also makes me not want to play the game. Your punishment for dying is that the game's progression completely grinds to a halt for up to 2 hours, forcing you to go through a tedious process of grinding to get back gear that you've already grinded for once already. And I lose skill points. You can prepare for such a situation. You can do the grinding before you die, not after you die. But that is essentially the exact same thing. You're grinding the pacing to a halt, forcing the player to spend up to an hour and a half grinding for gear just in case they die. It's the same issue, except instead of doing it after you die, you're doing it before you died. The game expects you to be so extremely over-prepared for every situation you put yourself in, but even if you do prepare that much, you can still just get unfortunate and die one too many times anyway, leaving all of the extra gear you grinded for stranded too far away anyway, thereby wasting all of that time you spent preparing. Take the mountain biome for example. To go into the mountains, you need a special frost resistance potion, or else you get the freezing debuff, which means that you slowly take damage until you die. You have to leave a few frost resistance potions at home, otherwise you might lose your items if you die on the mountain and aren't able to retrieve them. Let's say I leave 3 back at home. If I die in the mountains and then take 3 failed attempts to get my items back on the mountain, it's completely game over. I can't retrieve my items because I'll freeze to death before I make it. I ran out of frost resistance potions and now I'm completely doomed. And dying in the mountains or other difficult biomes can be as simple as slightly mismanaging your stamina bar one time whilst being attacked by more than one enemy. That's all it takes to set off this negative chain of events, and that's it, game over. You can do everything right. Prepare as much as possible, build yourself a portal, and you can still be screwed over just by an unfortunate enemy spawn or something. But hey, at least flying there doesn't take too long. But now it's the quickfire round. Easy to fix inconveniences that make the game slightly more annoying than it probably should be. 3, 2, 1. There are damage types, and some bosses can be weak, resistant, or completely immune to certain damage types. This makes preparing for a boss extremely difficult on your first playthrough without just googling the wiki. The stamina bar is only increased by your food. Losing stamina is a good way to die instantly. Managing the stamina bar is a core part of gameplay, but it feels like if there's one too many enemies, there's no amount of stamina management that you could possibly do to save yourself or fight back. My character is completely and utterly defeated by a very small hill when I don't have enough stamina to run up it. If an enemy catches me trying to run this way without stamina, I will die instantly. There's a biome called the Mistlands at the very edge of the world. Me and my friend spent 25 minutes sailing there, only to discover that it's an unfinished work-in-progress biome and literally nothing spawns there. Time to sail back. The pacing goes from quick progression to complete standstill repeatedly throughout the game. Some gear takes a tremendous amount of time to grind for, and some takes about 10 minutes. The more times you die, the slower the pacing becomes. The punishment for dying is not only loss of skill points, but the game grinding to a halt for up to 2 hours. The enemy's AI is extremely stupid. Sometimes it's in my favour, sometimes it isn't. The map is too big. This manifests itself in sailing becoming a tedious process, but the sailing mechanics itself are actually perfect. It just feels like they're terrible because the map is more than double the size it realistically should be, while also simultaneously being completely empty of anything interesting to do outside of a small inner circle of islands. Please, let me teleport through portals with my metals and ores. I don't want to sail for 9 years every time I want to make a new hat. The mountain biome has a freezing debuff that encompasses the whole biome. It will kill you slowly unless you use a frost resistance potion or a special cape to avoid the debuff. But even with these items, you will still start to die to the debuff anyway if it begins to rain or snow, because apparently a magical frost resistance potion doesn't give me enough resistance to frost magically to resist the snow on the ground and the rain on my head at the same time, so I die anyway. There are certain things in the game that aren't told to you explicitly, but if you're a new player they can completely destroy your entire run. Most notably, the leviathans that look like floating islands will sink under the ocean if you sit and mine on them for too long. As a new player, if you don't realise that this island is actually a living creature, and you park your boat slightly too far away, you will almost certainly die stranded in the middle of the ocean, unable to retrieve your items for the next 2 hours, or more. You can't see crafting recipes without being at the appropriate crafting table. Let me look at these recipes while I'm away from home, please. And finally, bosses are sometimes located very far away from the spawn island to arbitrarily force you to travel far out into the world, to try and meaninglessly justify the map being as big as it is. Whew! That was a lot. I'm glad I got that off my chest. What were we talking about again? Oh yeah, there's a video, right. Valheim, Valheim, in my opinion, is a damn shame. Because it's clearly got the framework of an incredible game in there somewhere. It's just bogged down by a lot of stuff that seems like it's poorly thought out. Padding the game's runtime for no real reason, enormous map size for no real reason, realistic elements just for the sake of it which add nothing to gameplay, and a death system so punishing that I would never have completed this game if I wasn't playing in multiplayer. The game has so much potential and the developers are hopefully still hard at work making it into a product that's much more refined and polished. And the final boss, Yagluth, is a perfect personification of Valheim as a whole. Awesome aesthetics, cool boss music, but has way too much health for no reason other than to prolong the fight. And he gets completely defeated by this small little incline, glitching him out and letting us shoot him until he dies. Yeah, I know it's early access, they'll fix the bug, but the rest of it still stands. This video, I'm sure, will have made a lot of people upset, but in the enormous torrent of overwhelmingly positive reviews that couldn't think of a single bad thing to say about the game, I thought I'd just leave my 2 cents right here for anyone who might be wondering where the criticisms of this game lie. I would love to see any disagreements with the points I've made in the comments, because maybe I've missed something somewhere that might prove me a bit wrong, but the discussion needs to be had either way, because there's no such thing as a perfect game. But if you read the reviews of this game, you might be tricked into thinking that Valheim is such a game. Thanks for watching.